After viciously murdering all four Illuminati members, Wanda makes her way towards America's holding cell, only to be temporarily delayed by a mind invasion by Professor X, giving America enough time to break out. After dealing with this, Wanda proceeds to chase Strange, Christine, and America through a tunnel leading to a door which in turn leads to where the Book of Vishanti is kept, just like in the dream at the beginning. The tunnel chase scene was fun to watch and ended in a jump scare, although I have to admit the staging for it was absolutely stupid. There's no way these idiots just stood there for a solid 20 seconds waiting to find out where Wanda went instead of getting the heck out of there as fast as their legs can carry them like any sensible person would. And while it did still get me and looked visually creepier, I must say this jump scare didn't startle me quite as much as the one just earlier where Wanda comes out of the dark hole while Professor X is in her head. I still saw that one coming, but it was a lot more unexpected than the later one, I thought. If you ask me, the most unnerving Wanda scene in the movie wasn't even a jump scare. It was when the photo of her turns around and looks at you in the first dreamwalking scene. That legitimately creeped me out. So, our trio makes it to the Book of Vishanti, and Strange actually gets it before, what do you know, Wanda shows up once again and destroys it, this time actually successfully capturing America and using her own powers to send her right to the Darkhold Castle where evil Wanda is located. Strange and Christine, on the other hand, end up in a new universe that experienced an incursion. In other words, someone screwed up and everything in that universe was killed, along with reality itself being twisted into an ominous-looking wasteland of destruction and desolation. That description took some brain cells to come up with. They find the sanctum of that universe is Doctor Strange, which I must say is the perfect example of something looking foreboding while also somehow beautiful at the same time. Truly a work of CGI art. Strange goes inside the sanctum and meets his alternate self, who is generally known as Sinister Strange, despite that name not actually being used in the movie. Turns out he uses the Darkhold too, and it gives him a third eye. Him and regular Strange have a fight using magic musical notes. This has to be one of the most unique fight scenes I've ever seen. It was quite interesting to watch and perfectly fits the weirdness of a Doctor Strange movie. The fight ends with Sinister Strange being yeeted out the window and impaled on a spike fence Sauron style. And on the topic of Sinister Strange, one other thing that disappointed me about this movie was that he didn't say that epic line of dialogue from the trailer.
Things just got out of hand.
I find it rather strange that they chose to remove this from the movie, as it sounded really cool. I was waiting for him to say it the whole time, and he never did. Why? Now we get to the final portion of the movie, which is also the part that I had the most problems with. Knowing of no other solution now that the Book of Vishanti is gone, Strange resorts to using the Darkhold himself. He uses the dreamwalking spell to possess the dead body of the version of himself that was with America at the beginning of the movie, which apparently is even more forbidden than plain dreamwalking. Basically a zombie at this point, he portals over to Mount Wundagore to try and stop Wanda. The literal souls of the damned appear and try to take Strange down into some kind of dark underworld or whatever the heck is happening in this scene. He manages to somehow get control of them and chain them to himself, forming a giant physical cape of them around himself, which he uses to fly up to the Darkhold Castle. This entire sequence of events is probably the worst thing for kids that is in this movie. While the majority of Wanda's magic, for example, is just big red bolts of energy that would probably fall more under the category of a superpower, some of the stuff she uses in this movie, as well as the whole undead Doctor Strange thing, feels a lot darker. This kind of glossed over me when I saw it in the theater, but the circles of candles that they use when dreamwalking looks uncomfortably similar to setups in real-life occultic rituals. Needless to say, this is quite disturbing. While zombie Doctor Strange with a cape of souls around him looks kind of cool visually, the ideas behind it are very not cool, and certainly not something that kids should be exposed to in a movie. Upon arriving at the Darkhold Castle, Zombie Strange has a brief battle with Wanda that ends with him getting disabled. Funny, you'd think that being a literal zombie would make you somewhat immune to damage that would normally be fatal. I also didn't like the fact that both America and Wong seem to be relatively unfazed by Strange's current state of being. You'd think they would be horrified by it, and frankly, I think that's what should have happened. The fact that he casually talks to America as if there's nothing wrong with it and even does something as humorous as wink at her really bugs me. It's almost as if they're making it seem like using the Darkhold to perform an evil spell is just fine. Even if it was really the only way to defeat Wanda, which it probably wasn't, there should have been massive repercussions for doing something like that, not just a third eye popping out of your forehead like what we see at the end of the movie. America tries to punch Wanda into another universe, having gained control of her power after a pep talk with Zombie Strange. But it soon becomes obvious that Wanda is too powerful to be defeated by strength or powers, so instead America opens up the 838 universe. At least, I think that's what it is. It could be a different one. And we see the other Wanda and her kids. Blinded by the Darkhold and her love for her kids, evil Wanda throws other Wanda out of the way and tries to get to the boys, who are terrified by her and rightfully call her a witch. In this scene comes probably the worst piece of dialogue in the entire movie.
I would never hurt you. Never. I would never hurt anyone. I'm not a monster.
Wow. Well, that line may have made perfect sense in a different context. Her saying that after spending the whole movie brutally murdering dozens of people makes about as much sense as...
Somehow Palpatine returned.
That one rightly got some slightly angry theater reactions. After this, evil Wanda breaks down in sadness at the boys rejecting her, and the other Wanda comes over and tries to console her. America then closes the portal shortly afterwards, and Wanda, deeply moved and seemingly broken free of the Darkhold's influence, resolves to destroy the castle and all of the Darkhold copies with it, so that
no one will ever be tempted by the Darkhold again.
The others leave, and Wanda does indeed collapse the castle and seemingly dies. Although we absolutely know that there's no way she's actually dead. Back in our universe, America is training back at Kamartaj with a bunch of sorcerers. Hold on a second, where did they all come from? Didn't most of them die during Wanda's rampage here earlier in the movie? The movie ends with Strange walking down the street, then suddenly, as mentioned earlier, he falls down on his knees in agony and sprouts a third eye just like Sinister Strange's, courtesy of the Darkhold. And as people have pointed out, this eye is rather bad in terms of CGI. But the visual effects in the rest of the movie are great, so I won't complain too much. Well, that ended up being far longer than I originally intended. Obviously, I couldn't cover every little plot hole and mistake, so there were a lot of smaller details that I left out of my analysis for the sake of not bogging down the flow of the video. Overall, this was, generally speaking, a fairly enjoyable movie in my opinion. The action was great, the acting was really good, and there were a lot of interesting twists and unexpected things that made it fun to watch. I did like the more serious tone of it, and while largely humorous MCU movies have their place, I absolutely love Guardians of the Galaxy, for example. This one definitely felt fresh and different compared to a lot of recent films. That being said, this movie had its fair share of flaws. The plot was quite messy and sometimes didn't make much sense, although I guess that's somewhat excusable given that it's a Doctor Strange movie. And of course, all of the problems that I mentioned previously. Aside from those, my biggest complaint about this movie was that it felt like it could have done a lot more with its story than it actually did. Allow me to elaborate. We see a total of 22 universes in this film, and most of the movie takes place in a grand total of 3 of them, including the regular old Earth that they come from in the first place, which is referred to as Earth 616. The whole multiverse concept felt underused, as did the alternate Doctor Stranges. When I saw the trailer, I was hoping that other versions of Strange would be the main threat in this movie, although I won't complain about Wanda being the villain as it surprised me and gave it an interesting twist. From the single shot of Zombie Strange in the trailer, I thought it was going to be some kind of super evil, horrifying Doctor Strange spider monster thing. That was a mouthful. The way I saw it, it made it seem like the Zombie Strange would be the ultimate evil in this movie, way worse than even Sinister Strange, and I'm still picturing how much better it would have been had it played out in this way instead of what we got. Also, the ending with Wanda felt somewhat dissatisfying to me. I felt like it should have taken more than just the realization from seeing the boys to break her free from the Darkhold. I'm not entirely sure how this could have been done to make it work, but definitely in a different way than it happened. Besides this, the fact that Vision is barely even mentioned in the movie seems really weird considering that losing him was one of the main reasons for her grief, not just her fake kids. And the sad thing is, Elizabeth Olsen's acting in this scene is extremely good. You can really feel Wanda's sadness conveyed through her facial expressions, and that combined with the music almost makes me want to turn off my brain and just enjoy it. I think that with a couple of tweaks and a better build-up, this could have been a really good and emotionally impactful scene, but because of the sloppy writing, this one and many others that I think are actually pretty good but evaluated by themselves, ended up being not as great in the overall scheme of the movie due to the poor way in which they were all connected together. Apart from the problems with the agenda forcing and showing the use of something very evil as not being that bad, the phrase that comes to mind the most when I think of this movie is wasted potential. The movie as a whole was also too short, I thought. It should have been at least 2.5 hours, if not even longer, with the scope of the things that it seemed the writers were trying to achieve here. Although I will say that they did a fairly decent job at making it still seem longer than 2 hours. With all that said and done, I'd probably give this movie around a 7 out of 10. It was pretty enjoyable when it wasn't having problems, and purely in terms of excitement, intensity, and the ability to keep me on the edge of my seat, I'd rate it higher than No Way Home. However, the latter movie had a much more streamlined storyline, better dialogue, and good moral lessons compared to Multiverse of Madness's somewhat messy writing and very questionable morals. So, No Way Home still holds its place as my favorite post-Endgame MCU film. Well, that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video, even if it was a bit long. I'd appreciate feedback on it so I can improve on things in the future. Thanks for watching. See ya.